That gambling, drunken bastard murdered my sister, my niece, and should never have pardoned him.
In December 1949, the bodies of Beryl Evans and her baby daughter Geraldine were found at 10 Rillington Place in Notting Hill, London. Beryl's husband, Timothy Evans, was found guilty of their murders and executed in March 1950. But 3 years later, after the upstairs neighbour John Christie moved out, police uncovered 6 more bodies inside the house and garden. Christie was arrested, convicted of murdering his wife Ethel, and hanged. These new bodies sparked decades of controversy over who was responsible for killing Beryl and Geraldine. This led to Timothy Evans being pardoned for the crimes.
What people need to understand is the story they've been told about Christie and 10 Rillington Place is all wrong.
In this never-before-seen interview, you'll hear from Peter Thorley, Beryl's youngest brother, and from his wife, Lee. They've spent more than half a century trying to prove what they always believed, that Timothy Evans had been the right man all along.
Well, Beryl and I always got on well together, more so than Basil and Pat. There was the 4 of us. I don't know, Beryl was such a loving girl, even as a little girl. She always would walk along with me with her arm around me. We just loved each other, you know. If I had any problems, I'd go straight to Beryl and she'd sort them out as best she could for me. She always looked after me.
After the Second World War, Beryl got a job, and that's when, Peter says, everything changed.
She got a little part-time job before she got the job at Grosvenor House to teach herself shorthand typing. She was very pleased that she knew it, so she applied for a job at the Grosvenor House Hotel, and she got the job. And she was so excited because there used to be quite a lot of stars there, but one in particular was the opera singer Richard Tolber. And he took a liking to Beryl and used to come and talk to her a lot. And she used to come home so excited that Richard Tolber had spoken to her, you know. I don't know, the thing that spoilt it all was a friend of hers that was at the same place arranged a blind date for her. And she went on this blind date because she was a very quiet, pretty girl. She was very pretty, Beryl. And she went on this blind date and she met this Timothy Evans. I didn't know anything about him. Although he lived along St Mark's Road, I'd never seen him. But then she brought him home and I just didn't like him. When I first looked at him, I thought, you're not good enough for my Beryl. He was such a cocky sort of fellow. He knew everything, and I just couldn't get on well with him. And I used to say to Beryl, why have you gone out with him? You can find somebody nicer than him. He used to gamble and drink, and he used to turn around and tell people that his father was an Italian count. I've never heard of a Welsh count, have you? No, but that's what he used to tell people. He was just a bragger all the time. And I wouldn't trust him at all. He lies. And I just couldn't understand Beryl. She's a lovely girl to go out with him.
Before long, Beryl and Timothy Evans tied the knot.
Well, it was a registry office. It was up in Abbott Grove. And it was just a normal little ceremony, you know. And after the wedding service, we walked from there down to Evans' mother's home, where she had the little reception. And Beryl became pregnant. She gave up her job. And his mother, Mrs. Probat, told him that there wasn't room for the 2 of them and the baby. In Rillington Place, the houses were both sides, but running along the right-hand side of it as you walk down was the railway line. And Evans's sister, Eileen, was on the train. And she looked out the window and she saw this sign, rooms to let, in the top of number 10 Rillington Place. So she went back and told Evans there was rooms to let. And he went round there and saw Mr. Christie.
Life for Beryl and her new husband wasn't a happy one.
When I went round there, I could hear him at the bottom of the stairs, and there were 2 flights up, shouting at Beryl, and I couldn't believe it, because she was such a quiet girl, and he was just a bully all the time. He used to drink too much for a start. He used to shout at her because of the housekeeping money, and she'd never paid the rent because she didn't have it. But he never said anything about his gambling and his drinking. If he hadn't done that, she could have paid everything, you see, because they had their furniture on hire purchase. He used to blame Beryl for everything. And it just wasn't right. He used to upset me, you see. Oh, I used to go up there to see her, and I went in there one day and I said, what's that on your arms, Beryl? Oh, she said, it's where Tim hit me. I said, he started hitting you that much, has he? To bruise you? I said, you've got to get out. You've got to get away from him. And, she didn't know where to go, but I still came up from Brighton to see her. And she was used to tell me she had no money for food. I felt so sorry. I said, well, we've got to get you away from here. Got to get you down to Brighton where you'll be safe, away from him.
When Peter visited Beryl at Rillington Place, he met the downstairs neighbours, John and Ethel Christie.
When I used to go down to Rillington Place, sometimes Beryl wasn't in. She'd either be out with the baby or shopping or whatever. And I'd say to him, he'd say to me, well, come on, sit with me in the kitchen, Ethel, who was his wife, was out. So I used to sit there in the kitchen, and then he'd say to me, do you want a cup of tea? I said, oh, yes, please. He said, round the corner was a Jewish baker's. He said, I've got some sticky buns here, would you like one? Oh, yeah. Well, in those days, you never called people by their Christian names. You weren't taught. You'd either call them Mr. and Mrs. or Uncle and Auntie. Well, I started calling him Uncle Reg. He liked that. And he used to say, well, Beryl's not back, let's play cards. So they had a little table in the window because it wasn't a very big kitchen. And we used to sit there playing Snap or Rummy, you see. And maybe his wife used to come in, Ethel. She was lovely, Auntie Ethel. And then all of a sudden Beryl might come in and you'd hear her go up the stairs, because no carpet on the stairs, you'd hear her go up. And I say to him, well, thank you, Uncle Reg. He said, anytime come round, always pop in and see us.
He was very fond of Beryl and the baby, and they used to look after him on a regular basis. No fear at all. In fact, he was particularly protective of her on one particular occasion when Evans was beating her up. She went down to the Christies, and Ethel Christie said, I think you ought to report it to the police. Reg, take her up to the phone box and call the police.
They knew what a nasty man Evans was. And one day, Uncle Reg said to me, you want to watch him, Peter. He's a nasty character. We hear him, we're on the ground floor, he's 2 floors up, and we hear him shouting. And the abuse he gives to Beryl. And she's such a quiet girl, she doesn't need that. And I said, I know, he's hateful. That's why I tried afterwards to try and get her down to Brighton, get her away from him.
In 1949, encouraged by his father's new wife, Peter left England for work in New Zealand.
You see, this woman, Margarita Annie Bernard, that he'd met, she didn't like us. She didn't want us around. And Basil moved out. And Pat went down to Margate to my auntie, and there was just me left. And I left school at 14, which we used to in those days. And once I left school, I wanted to get a job, and I started a job at the Old Ship Hotel as a page boy. Well, I don't know what it was, but she forced my father to apply for me to go to New Zealand to emigrate, which cost him £10 to, and she knew I was going to be away for 2 years because you had to promise the New Zealand government you'd stay 2 years. Well, I went up, it was in November, and I went up there this weekend and I said to Beryl, they're sending me to New Zealand. What for, she said. I said, I don't know. You know, I've no trouble down there. I've got myself a little job, but Margaret, or Margarita, she wants me out of the way.
Soon after Peter settled in New Zealand, a letter arrived with tragic news.
The letter was sent to my governor, Eric Manson, not to me directly, and it asked him to convey what had happened. And he read it out to me, and I didn't realise until then that Beryl actually was murdered 2 days after I left. And little Geraldine 2 days after that. I just couldn't believe it. Now, this was in January, and she was murdered in the November. And in that letter, he said to me about he had been to see a Christmas show and everything, and I thought, what are you like, you know, with the loss of your daughter and granddaughter, and you can go and see a show. It all seemed to go over his head. It broke my heart, really did. I lost a person I really loved.
For about 3 days up to the 6th of November, they had been rowing and rowing around. Even the neighbours up the road had heard it. And it was getting worse and worse and worse. He was drinking more and more, and this one particular night he came back, and as soon as he got in, they were rowing again. And he went out for another drink and came back. And from all accounts, he had the rope in the van. He made no hesitation in the minute she turned round, putting the rope round her neck. From behind, he was behind her because the marks proved that. And he strangled her in front of little baby Geraldine. He then had the job of trying to keep his job open and looking after the baby. But the baby was fretful, crying, screaming, hungry, dirty. And he just went out this night and had a real skinful. As he came back and walked down Rillington Place, he heard that child screaming. He'd had enough drink. And as he walked in, we understand that he took the tie off. He picked her up, put it straight round her neck.
The moment Peter heard, he believed he knew who was responsible: Timothy Evans. It took him 2 years to get back to the UK, determined to prove it.
Because I said to Mr. Manson, I know who's done this, and it's Evans. He said, well, how do you know that? I said, I know Evans. I said, he's such a bad-tempered, nasty character. He'd come home every night drunk. He didn't know what he was doing. He'd fling himself about. Horrible character. And I know who's done it. You had to promise the New Zealand government that you had to stay there for 2 years. Well, I moved from Mr. Manson's farm, which was up north of the island of New Zealand, and came down to a place called Hamilton, where I worked on a stud farm. I think I was there quite a few months, and then I said to him, I'm sorry, I've got to move. I've got to try and get to Auckland and try and get, when the time comes, I've got to go back to England. And they were quite happy. They understood because they knew what had happened. So I moved to Auckland, and I stayed at the YMCA there. And I got a job with a newspaper company, going around collecting all the adverts for them to publish in the papers. But I did tell the governor that when a ship came up, when my 2 years turned up, I was going back to England. And he understood. I told him why. He understood, and he said, any time, it doesn't make no difference. You don't have to give any notice. You go. Well, I used to go around the docks and seeing captains of different ships and asking if they had any vacancies. Because sometimes people used to jump board, and I never got, it must have been about 3 or 4 months later. And I got on board this ship called the Napier Star, and I saw the captain. I said, have you got any vacancies, sir? And he said, yes, somebody's jumped board. He said, I need what they call a seaman's peggy. That's waiting on the seaman, I said, I don't care what job I do. I want to get back to England. So he said, well, we're sailing tonight, so you've got to get down there. I couldn't move fast enough. I tell you, I went back, got my case, which I'd already had packed, and went down and saw the governor of the newspaper, and he said, well, good luck to you. And off I went, got on board the ship, and we left that night, and it took 7 weeks and 4 days to get back, and I ended up in Liverpool and caught a train down to Brighton.
By the time Peter got back to the UK, Evans had already been convicted and executed for Beryl's murder.
Well, I know he'd been hanged, and I thought that wasn't good enough for him. I was so upset that my lovely sister ended up like this, and my little niece. I haven't got over it to this day. I've mourned every day for all these years, and I can't help it. I'm sorry. It's I've had a broken heart all these years. I just couldn't believe it happened to her. She was such a lovely girl, and my little niece, to have the life taken away from her, and the little unborn little boy never had a chance even to come into the world. Yes, when Beryl was murdered, they found out she was pregnant because they had to take her down the mortuary and do an autopsy on her. And they found she was 4 months pregnant with a little boy. So that little boy never had a chance to come into the world.
Any sense of justice quickly disappeared when John Christie was accused.
Couldn't believe it. He wasn't that type of man. He was so kind. I just thought they were making it up, thought it was a story. And when he went missing and they were looking for him, I thought to myself, no, I used to spend all that time with him. I can't believe they're talking about the same man. Of course, they arrested him on the Thames embankment. Anyway, I knew he hadn't killed Beryl or Geraldine. He loved that little girl, and he was very, very fond of Beryl, and he would not have done that. So it was all down to Evans. Originally, years before my sister moved in, Mr. Christie had already killed 2 women. That was in 1943. Now, until then, nobody thought about him as a murderer. So really and truly, when Evans did what he did, killed my sister and my niece, there was only one murderer in the house, and that was Evans. It wasn't until later, when Christie started murdering again, that, they said there was 2 murders. And as far as I'm concerned, okay, Mr. Christie to me, or as I said, Uncle Reg to me, was a very, very kind man, and there's no way he would have hurt that little girl or my sister. No way. Evans was a bully, a drunkard, and really a coward to have done what he did to my sister and his little daughter. And it's always been in my mind the word go. Evans did it, and he did. I'll take it to my grave. He did it. And Mr. Christie didn't.
Peter always insisted there was plenty of evidence pointing to Evans, even though the government officially pardoned him of their murders on the 18th of October 1966.
Yeah, because the houses opposite Mrs. Swan lived there, and she was talking to her friend, her next door neighbour, and they heard Evans shouting at Beryl, "I'll kill you, I'll push you out this window." And they couldn't believe it. And he was up there, and they were frightened he was going to push her out the window because the window was open. Another thing was that later on, when they found out about Christie, he gassed his people. My sister wasn't gassed, and neither was the baby. My sister was strangled with a piece of rope that Evans had in the van that he drove. And after that, the baby was still alive. And you know what little babies are? They don't see their mummies, and they start screaming. They're not looked after well, and Evans couldn't put up with that. So he just went and killed the little soul. He was like that. He was just a bad-tempered. He didn't have the brain to think. He confessed to the police that he had killed the baby because he couldn't stand her screaming. And you know what babies are like when they scream. I suppose the little girl was hungry and dirty, and he just didn't look after her. So the only way you could shut her up, really, which is a horrible phrase to use, was to strangle her. And that's what he did.
Peter met Lee when he taught her how to drive. When she met Peter, she realised he'd carried this for decades and decided to help him fight for the truth.
I rather felt that he needed to talk. It was at the end of a driving lesson. I can't even remember where it was. And he told me, he said, "Do you remember, have you heard of the Rillington Place murders?" I said, "Oh, yes." And he explained to me that Beryl Evans was his sister and that Geraldine was his niece. The shock was the relationship. Took a lot to accept that, because you automatically think, how does he feel? But we did talk about it an awful lot. He explained that he wasn't happy with the outcome of it, and that he was convinced that Evans had murdered them both. I suppose it was a few years, and I don't think either of us were convinced that he should ever have got a pardon at the end of it. And I think it became a bit of an obsession. It did with me. I like the nitty-gritty of getting involved. And at the time I had a very good friend that was very familiar with the records office. And we started digging, started reading. It was amazing how much information was out there when you started looking. And one of the most detailed and the most conclusive thing was the post-mortem results, and it proved without doubt who did what. As for the idea of two murderers in the same house, they were totally different styles. But from what Peter has told me, Reg Christie was a perfect gentleman, and he said he had no fear of him, none whatsoever. When I managed to get the pathology report, to be honest, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. It was complete. It proved beyond all reason who had done what. And I can confirm that the stories that Christie performed an abortion on her is untrue. That at the time that she was examined, she had not been interfered with in any way. She was pregnant still with a 4.5-month-old fetus, and there was no evidence at all that there was any interference by Christie whatsoever. 3 years later, at Christie's trial, her body and Geraldine's was exhumed. Why? I've never quite understood. He wasn't on trial for her. But it came up again about the gassing. And there was a team of pathologists that did that. And the other partner of the one, actually did the exhumation examination. And again, there was no evidence of gassing.
Once the post-mortem results had been uncovered, the next step for Peter and Lee was figuring out where Beryl and Geraldine had been buried.
We got a lot of information regarding family and connections, and we did originally start off with the copies of the death certificates of both of them, which clearly had on that strangulation due to ligature. And it was on both of them, a lot of detail, and we started from there. And then we got a few more papers, and then it was going into the family side of it. I think the biggest shock to me was to find that his father hadn't arranged or paid for her funeral, and that she was buried in the pauper's grave, one of 5, which was heartbreaking, really. When we found out where it was, we did go up. Very difficult.
Well, it took a long time to find out where Beryl was buried. And it was only because my eldest daughter got a hold of a book about Rillington Place from a friend of hers, and we were reading through it, and it mentioned the cemetery. So we went up there and spoke to the man in the office, and he said yes. And he showed us where her grave was. There were 2 or 3 people underneath her. She had been exhumed in 1953 for Christie's trial, so we knew she was on top. We'd been trying to get her moved. We got stopped by the Bishop of London at that time, and I can't see why. Anyway, we've applied again, and we've got the permission now from the cemetery that we would be able to move her, and I will then know where she is, and once she's buried, I don't care where, and I can die the following day, because my family know that I'm going to be buried with her, and that's what I want, and they know that. So I will be reunited with my sister Beryl and my little niece Geraldine.
The case of 10 Rillington Place And what really happened to Beryl and Geraldine Evans has been argued for decades and retold many times. For Peter and Lee, they'll keep fighting for justice until they find peace for Beryl and Geraldine. We want to say a big thank you to everyone who's subscribed to the channel so far. We really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it gives us more opportunities to keep putting out the kind of content you want to watch. This is Matt from Underworld Uncut. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.